Hello, everyone, and welcome to Persuasive Communication. My name is Mirjana Pantic. Today's lecture is going to be about communicator factors in persuasion. So far, I'm going to share my screen with you. So what we have covered so far and what we have focused on were basically audiences' attitudes, how they're being formed and changed. But now we are going to focus on the other side, the communicator themselves, and what factors with respect to communicators are important in persuasion. Let's start with the first one, charisma. What charisma represents? It is a certain quality of the individual personality by virtue of which he is set apart from ordinary men and treated as endowed with supranational, superhuman, or at least exceptional powers and qualities. It's Max Weber's definition from 1968. So it basically means that somebody who has charisma is a person who has qualities that make them different from other people. These qualities are exceptional, and these qualities are extraordinary in a way. What are some of the key characteristics of charisma, and how do these characteristics help a charismatic person win affection of those they're communicating to? Charisma interacts with audience factors because followers influence the self-perception of leaders. So the importance of charisma is not just reflected in individuals' qualities, but it is also reflected in this interaction with audiences. Like what kind of characteristics and how do followers perceive us? It really affects the self-perception of charismatic leaders. Charisma is also constrained by historical factors. For example, an individual who has charisma in one historical period might not necessarily be influential in some other historical period. Another thing about charisma is that historical factors and historical context in general are really important because the chemistry that develops between the speaker and audience is a product of a particular set of circumstances, psychological need, and social conditions. We can take a look at different types of charismatic leaders, such as Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and Zoran Mamdani. These are basically positive examples of leaders, but there are also very negative examples of charismatic leaders. One such example is that of Hitler, who utilized his persuasiveness in destructive ways. I also want to point at one of the most recent examples, which is Zoran Mamdani. He is the mayor of New York City, and I was actually recently I talked about him and his charismatic characteristics and how they are relevant in today's age. The way he communicates, the way he relates to people, and the way he expresses this charisma is very tied to what young generations, especially Gen Zers, want to see in a leader. So they want somebody that they can relate to. They want somebody who is not afraid of showing their emotional intelligence and empathy, who actually emphasizes these important characteristics for somebody who wants to connect better with younger generations. So he really has a lot of charisma, but I think that his charisma, in many ways, is really tied to the generation that he aims to represent. Now, what are key communicator characteristics? What kind of characteristics are the most important in terms of persuasiveness? There are three key characteristics: authority, credibility, and social attractiveness. All of these components are different, and I will try to explain each component in detail. The first one is authority. Authority comes from a person's position in a social structure. So let's say I have authority in class because I'm your professor. So in that regard, I'm your leader. The dean has with their position in the university structure, they also represent authority. Somebody working in the government, let's say the mayor of New York City, has the authority that comes from their position in a social structure. So basically, there are different types of authority, and authority in general involves the ability of a person to provide rewards and dispense punishments. So when I look into my authority over you, it involves my ability to give you good grades or bad grades, provide rewards, and dispense punishment. People are socialized to obey authority. And in this lecture, I will reflect on the Milgram experiments example. It is an old experiment that shows how people obey when they get instructions when some authority tells them what to do. Authority is different from credibility because a person can be an authority but lack credibility. You can have somebody who is high up in a social structure, but you might not perceive them as a credible person because you feel that they lack knowledge, they lack expertise, they lack intelligence or something else, even though they're in the position of authority. Credible communicators' ideas are congruent with our attitudes and we accept them. So what we perceive as a credible communicator is in line with how we feel about them. Let's take a look at, I mentioned this example of the Milgram experiments. So with respect to how people are prone to obey authority. The Milgram experiment refers to the period between 1960 and 1963, when Milgram ran a series of obedience experiments in which participants, always assigned the teacher role, believed they were shocking a learner for memory mistakes. So basically, there were two groups of people in that experiment, like participants who had this teacher role assigned to them, and then there were actors or the learners who were strapped into a chair and appeared to receive increasingly strong electric shocks while the teacher operated a shock generator ranging from 15 to 450 volts. When the learner were basically in the role of shocking, the teachers were basically in the role of shocking those learners who made mistakes. When the learner protested, screamed, or fell silent, the experimenter urged the teacher to continue. They would tell them it is absolutely essential that you continue, which created intense stress and conflict for participants. And despite this visible stress, more than 65 of participants obeyed up to the maximum voltage, revealing how far ordinary people will go in following authoritative commands to harm another person, even when it conflicts with their personal morals. So this basically explained a lot of events happening during the Second World War, when ordinary people were just following the rules, obeying the rules. So Milgram wanted to show this through the experiment that he conducted from 1960 to 1963. There were a lot of criticism. There was a lot of criticism following these experiments. Many of them were related to some ethical issues. Milgram for this reason, refined his experiments and identified conditions that increased or decreased obedience. Obedience was higher when the experimenter was physically present than when giving orders remotely. So one of the things that critiques were saying was that when basically they were instructed teachers to keep shocking the learners for memory mistakes that they made, they would repeat like continue. So the participants felt under pressure to continue distributing to continue pressing the shock generator because it is what they they were being told to do. But what happened is that when the comparison was made, when those experimenters were physically present when giving orders, then obedience of participants was much higher than when they were giving orders remotely over the phone, for example. In group settings, participants were much less likely to obey when others openly defied authority. So what that means, if there is a participant or two who simply say that they don't want to do what they're told to do, then other participants are more likely to follow them. And in such cases, the authority weakens. The most important thing to happen before the authority weakens is that enough people resist to obey the rules. Now I have an exercise for you. Before I continue with this lecture, I want you to read textbook chapter 11 and describe the ethical ramifications of the Milgram experiment. Write an essay of about 250 words and post it under Milgram experiment. So you have everything in the textbook. Just make sure to read it and then see what were main issues with respect to the Milgram experiments and what kind of ethical concerns did you identify in those experiments that he conducted? While authority represents a person's position in a societal structure, credibility is a different concept. Credibility is the attitude that people have toward a source of communication. So it's the attitude that is held at a given time by a receiver, by an audience member, by a citizen. A person's authority reflects their position in society, whereas credibility is a psychological or interpersonal communication construct. You see the difference. So there is a factual position that somebody holds in society, and then this is what's happening in our head, whether we perceive somebody as credible or non-credible. So it's a psychological or interpersonal communication construct. An individual, as I mentioned, can have authority, but lack credibility. For that reason, credibility refers to an audience member's perception of a communicator's qualities. What are crucial components of credibility? So there are several components of credibility. They include expertise, trustworthiness, goodwill, extroversion, sociability, and composure. Let's focus on three main components of credibility. The first one is expertise. Expertise is reflected in the knowledge or ability ascribed to the communicator. So if I know that this person has a PhD in communications and marketing, if this person has produced like extensive research in the field of communication, then I'm more likely to pay attention to their lectures. Trustworthiness is different from expertise as it refers to the communicator's perceived honesty, character, and safety. Are they really genuine when they discuss a certain issue? Are they being honest? To what extent do I feel safe while I'm hearing messages from them? And finally, there's goodwill. Goodwill is perceived caring. What does it mean for us as communicators? We need to show our audience that we respect them and that we want the best for them. Aside from these characteristics of a communicator, what also matters is context. The influence of credibility depends on the social situation, varying with factors like audience setting and circumstances of communication. Expertise and other credibility traits affect persuasion differently based on the receiver's biases, values, motivation, and ability to process the message. With respect to context, it is also important to mention cultural variation because the cultural context can have an impact on our creation of persuasive messages. For instance, in some non-Western society, credibility is seen as more flexible and context dependent, reflecting what is appropriate in a given situation. And finally, social attractiveness. One of the key characteristics of a communicator that has an impact on how their message will be received. So again, we talked about audiences, how they form attitudes, and how they change attitudes based on the messages they receive from a persuader. But from the other side of the spectrum, when we look into the communicator's characteristics, we see these other important components, which are authority, credibility, and social attractiveness. What does social attractiveness mean? The first one is likability. A person who is likable puts you in a good mood and makes you feel good. And that helps you access positive thoughts about the product the persuader is promoting. So if they put you in a good mood, if they make you feel good, then you're more likely to embrace the product they're promoting. Similarity. The one who shares your values or dresses like you is more likely to change your attitudes. However, the excess of similarity without expertise can reduce persuasion. So you cannot be too similar, but you need to share some similarities. When you talk to people, depending on the generation that you're talking to, you might change the way you dress for the occasion, or you might come to deliver a speech to a group of young people getting a degree in marketing and tell them, oh, I also studied at the same university, and that is one of the connection you established with them. And here I am, I've been in marketing for 10 years and so on. So you kind of show them that you have something similar with them before you continue. Physical attractiveness, do you think that that is important or not important in persuasion? It can be very important because people are more likely to pay attention to an attractive than non-attractive speaker, according to research. What are some of the tips that I would share with you? How do you make sure that you demonstrate this social attractiveness? That you're likable, that you're similar to those people you're addressing in some way so they can accept you better. First of all, use credential strategy. You want to make sure, because people like to get information from experts, so mention your expertise briefly at the start of your speech if you have it, but don't exaggerate. Don't brag too much about yourself because it might come off as obnoxious. So just mention your expertise briefly. So this is who I am. I have a degree in this field and I've been working in this field for this many years. And that is sufficient. If you have any awards, you can mention them, but you don't need to go into too many details when talking about yourself. Just use the most relevant information to establish your expertise when delivering a speech. Show genuine goodwill. Demonstrate that you really care about the audience and the topic. Authentic concern increases persuasive power. So when I'm talking to you, I really want to demonstrate that I care, that you are gaining some knowledge from me, that I really care that you're interested in this topic and that you want to learn in the course. So in my lectures and in my interactions with you inside the classroom, I want to make sure that I'm showing this goodwill, that I really care about you gaining knowledge from this course. Finally, you need to enhance likability and similarity. Let some positive personality traits show and highlight similarities with the audience when appropriate. Some positive personality traits, in some cases, it could be just your sunny disposition, or it can be your sense of humor, like some really good characteristics that you have. Make sure to emphasize them to enhance likability and say something that makes you similar to the people you're addressing, and project a confident, not arrogant delivery. Build your confidence through preparation and self-presentation. Prepare your speech. Think about great examples that you will share with your audience. Make sure to work on self-presentation, but also remain respectful, sincere, and grounded. Your appearance matters a lot in persuasion. Again, be confident, but your confidence should be built on that appearance and on your expertise and knowledge. Don't be arrogant. Don't show how you're smarter and better than them in any way. Appear as a confident yet person who is also able to demonstrate goodwill and to show some similarities with their audience. Now let's take a look at, this was the brief lecture, and let's just take a look at the key characteristics of a strong persuader. One of them is charisma. Charisma basically is embodied in qualities of an individual and these qualities set them apart from others, from ordinary people. Then communicator characteristics. Three key characteristics are authority, credibility, and social attractiveness. Authority comes from a person's position in a social structure. Credibility, on the other hand, encompasses expertise, trustworthiness, and goodwill. And it relates a lot to the perception that we have of a communicator. Finally, social attractiveness refers to likability, similarity, and physical attractiveness of a persuader. That is all that I had for you for today. These are my references. And of course, if you have any questions, you can email me. Thank you very much for listening and have a great week. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.